A dry wind dragged through the grass, lifting the dust in shallow breaths along the road's edge. There, where the gravel met the brittle weeds, she stood, or tried to. A dog, nothing but bone and hide, legs trembling under the weight of her own body. She didn't bark, she didn't flinch, but her eyes, wide and ambered with fatigue, followed every movement with unblinking awareness. The truck had slowed without reason, just a flicker of motion in the corner of the driver's eye. And then he saw her, still as stone, ribs casting narrow shadows beneath her coat, the skin around her mouth dry and cracked. She didn't run. She didn't have it in her. The man stepped down quietly. No sudden movements. He kept a soft distance, letting her see him. She wavered on her feet, front paws slightly splayed as if she might collapse forward but refused to fall. Her ears hung low. Her breathing was shallow and audible, more air than breath, yet there was something in the tilt of her head, the way her eyes searched him. Not pleading, not wild, but waiting, holding on. Her tail didn't move, not even once. Her back leg lifted briefly, then set down again with care. The man knelt in the dirt, slowly, watching her weight shift in response. No approach, no demand, only stillness and time. A few crows cawed from the distance, somewhere beyond the ridge. The wind pressed through the fence line, lifting loose wire into a soft clink. She blinked once, long and slow, then lowered herself to the ground with careful effort, folding her front legs one at a time, still watching him. Around her, the land felt empty. Dry patches of scrub, old tire ruts sunk deep from the last rain, now hardened like scars in the earth. A single aluminum can lay half buried under dust. Faded blue lettering peeled from the sun. There were no houses close, no barking from nearby dogs, no sign of recent life. She was alone. But she was not lost. Not completely. He opened the passenger door and returned with a small piece of jerky from the console. Not much, but something. He placed it on the ground 2 arms' lengths away from her. Then he backed away and waited. Her nose twitched, but she didn't move. Not yet. Minutes passed. The man sat cross-legged, his boots sinking slightly in the dirt. He didn't speak, didn't coax, just wait. Wind moved gently around them, tossing the dry grass, circling the silence. She tried once to rise again. Her front legs held, her hind legs shook. She paused there, halfway up, panting, then lowered herself again, eyes still on him. That's when he noticed the pattern in the dirt behind her. Small, staggered prints. Hers, leading from somewhere out of sight beyond the bend. Faint drag marks beside them, uneven, as if she'd been pulling herself forward for longer than her body could manage. And then she looked past him. Not at him. Past him. Toward the direction of his truck. Toward the road. A single glance that held just long enough to mean something. "It's okay, girl," he said quietly. His voice broke nothing. She blinked again. And then, slow as the wind itself, she pulled herself forward. One paw, then the next. She reached the meat and, with delicate motion, took it between her teeth. Chewed softly. Swallowed without lifting her head. She looked up at him again, and then turned her face toward the bend in the road, where the tall grass grew wild and uncut. She didn't bark. She didn't whimper. But the message was there. Not here. Not yet. She tried to stand again, this time with more resolve. Legs wobbling beneath a frame far too thin, but standing. Her breathing quickened. She looked at him once more. Took a single step. And then paused. I looked back. One more step. I looked back again. The man rose to his feet. No sudden movements. He left the door of the truck open. He didn't reach for her. He simply followed. She moved like a whisper now. Fragile, deliberate, never rushing. And with every step forward, she turned her head to be sure he followed. And he did. Dust curled at their heels as they walked the path together. The sun hung low, brushing gold across the grass. In the distance, the crows fell quiet. There was something waiting in the silence ahead, something she hadn't let go of, something that kept her walking, bone by bone, breath by breath, through wind, hunger, and time. She walked as if the earth might shift beneath her feet at any moment. Each step placed with care, her limbs unsteady, joints loose and raw from strain. The man followed a few paces behind, not crowding her, not calling. She led the way, and he simply honored that. The road faded into brush. Broken fencing lined the edges, once meant to hold something, now surrendered to time. The dog moved through it without pause, her frame barely stirring the tall grass that wrapped around her legs. The wind had softened now, brushing gently over the field like breath over water. Twice she stopped, once to rest her paw against a stone, testing her balance. The second time to turn her head and look back, not with hesitation, but confirmation, as if to say, "Are you still there?" He was. Her ribs shifted with each breath. Too sharp, too exposed. When she moved, her sides pressed in, the skin drawn tight over emptiness. But there was purpose in the way she chose her path. Not random, not lost. Her ears twitched at every small sound, eyes flicking toward movement in the grass but never straying from the invisible line ahead. The man saw it then. The rhythm of her body, not just in pain, but in tension. Not just hunger. Something else. A need that pressed from the inside, quiet and urgent. She wasn't running from anything. She was going to something. The sun had begun its descent, staining the horizon in warm tones of rust and rose. Long shadows stretched across the field, swallowing the lower parts of the brush. Insects stirred from their hiding places. The air grew still, heavy with waiting. She paused again, this time longer. Her legs shook slightly. She looked over her shoulder and met his eyes, and then, with a breath barely visible in her flanks, she pressed forward again. It was then he noticed her gait. Unbalanced. Not just from weakness. Her belly, though thin, held a subtle slackness. Not fullness, but aftermath. A looseness that spoke of something recent, something fragile. A body that had given and perhaps was still giving. She walked into a narrow grove of thorny shrubs, branches bare and gray from the season. The man ducked behind her, careful not to break the quiet. Beneath the thicket, the ground dipped into a shallow hollow. The dog slowed. At the edge of the grove, she stopped. Her ears lifted faintly the first time they had moved with intention. Her nose tilted down, scenting something unseen. And she waited. The silence thickened. He knelt behind her, far enough not to intrude, close enough to see her breath grow shallower, faster. She didn't move for several moments. Her body stiffened. Then, as if knowing the final steps must be her own, she crept forward. It was the way her posture changed that told him everything. Her head lowered. Her tail dropped, not in fear, but in care. And then, just beyond a rusted, collapsed shed wall, she slipped into the darkness beneath its slanted edge. The man stayed where he was, listening. There was no bark, no cry. Only a low sound, a noise like air catching in a throat. Then it was quiet. A minute passed, then two, and then, from the shadows, she appeared again. Her muzzle dusted with fine soil, her eyes locked with his. She didn't move toward him. She stepped aside, just enough, and waited. The man rose slowly. Every footstep is deliberate. No sudden shifts, no voice. As he reached the edge of the shed, he crouched low, and there, nestled in a hollow of dirt and shredded fabric, were 5 small bodies, still, pressed together. Their fur was damp, not with rain, but with breath and earth. Their limbs twitched barely, chests rising shallow, uneven. He couldn't hear them over the wind. But they were alive. She stood beside him now. Not close, but close enough. Her ribs flared gently with each breath. Her eyes watched their small movements, her ears tuned to their needs. And for the first time since he had found her, she sat. He looked down, then back at her. "You brought me here," he whispered. Her eyes stayed on the nest. The wind moved through the grove again, parting the grasses for a moment, like hands smoothing a blanket. A single leaf turned in the air, then settled. She lowered herself beside her pups, body curved protectively around them. One tiny paw pushed upward into her belly. She didn't flinch. She simply lay still, guarding what she could with what she had left. And beside her, the man knelt. Not to take, not to carry. Just to be there, to witness. To see the weight she had borne in silence, step after step, breath after breath. The light faded slowly. The grove darkened. And somewhere beyond the trees, night began to rise. The metal wall of the collapsed shed leaned crooked against the earth, its rusted edges crumbling with time. Years of weather had stripped it bare, leaving only bones of a shelter once used and then forgotten. Grass pushed up through its broken floor, tangled with remnants of tarp and crumbling wood. Beneath it, tucked deep in the dark space between soil and shadow, something small stirred. The dog's body was half submerged under the angled sheet of metal. Only the top of her back and one flank remained visible in the fading light. Her head was tucked inside, pressed close to the den. She did not move, not even to acknowledge the man still crouched nearby. Every part of her was fixed on what lay inside. When he eased down on one knee, careful not to shift the ground too harshly, the smell of earth and dry rot rose around him. The air was still. Beneath the rusted shelter his eyes adjusted slowly, shapes forming out of darkness. 5 small bodies, curled tightly against each other, lay in a shallow nest of old cloth and dead leaves. Their fur was thin, patchy in places, barely covering the skin beneath. One moved, a small twitch of a leg. Another shifted slightly, pressing its nose deeper into the warmth of the others. Their breathing was slow, fragile, almost soundless. He recognized it instantly, that edge between life and the other side of it. These pups had not been born into comfort. They had not opened their eyes to safety. Their mother had carried them here under hunger, under weight, under the pressure of being found or being too late. And still she had brought them this far. The man stayed low, eyes fixed on them. He didn't reach forward. He didn't speak. The mother dog turned her head slightly now, only enough for him to see her muzzle just above the smallest of the pups. Her nose rested near its back. She let her breath fall softly over it, keeping it warm in ways her body couldn't fully offer anymore. Her ribs pressed sharply against her skin each time she breathed. Her spine curved gently as she curled around them, forming the only wall they had known. She was still, exhausted, but alert. He leaned back a little, giving space to what didn't belong to him. Her ears flicked slightly. She knew he was there, but she did not move away. That, in itself, was enough. The shed creaked faintly in the wind. Dust shifted from the higher beams and settled around them. One of the pups let out a weak nasal sound, not a cry, just a push of effort from lungs still learning their shape. The others stirred in response, pressing in closer. The mother nudged that pup with her nose, just once. A quiet reassurance, not fussing, not frantic. A gesture of instinct. He watched her paw shift toward them, toes splayed, the nails worn down and cracked. She stretched it forward until it lightly touched the edge of the cloth they rested on, as if bracing them against the night. Her movements were measured even now. Not once did she move too fast. The man looked around them now. The disuse of the structure, the dry grasses curled in the corners, the long-forgotten wire fencing just beyond. How long had she carried them like this? How many days had passed since she'd last eaten fully? The small trail of paw prints he'd followed earlier seemed longer now in his mind. weighted with meaning. He had seen stray dogs before. He had helped when he could. But something about her, this quiet resolve, this hunger not only of body but of purpose, held him in a way he couldn't explain. One of the pups shifted again, a hind leg kicking gently, unfocused. The smallest let out another sound, higher this time, thin and weak. The mother responded instantly, adjusting her body to shield them better from the wind curling under the shed's edges. Her belly pressed close, her back arched slightly, and then, slowly, she looked toward him. Not for long, just a glance, but it stayed with him. He reached into the pocket of his jacket, pulling out the last of the dried meat. Small strips, barely enough, but something. He placed it gently on the ground beside her, not intruding, letting her decide. Her nose twitched. She shifted her weight to one side. Slowly, deliberately, she leaned forward and took the first piece. She chewed with care, tearing it into smaller portions. Then, without swallowing it all, she paused and looked back at the pups. Her tongue ran over their fur. He spoke barely above the air. "You did good," he said. Her ear flicked again. She returned to the meat, finishing it in small bites, then curled herself tighter around the pups, resting her head on the ground beside them. Her eyes remained open. For the first time, she didn't look like she was fighting to stand, or to walk, or to breathe. She looked like a mother. And he understood now what had driven her forward through so much emptiness. She hadn't been searching for food. She hadn't wandered by chance. She had chosen to be seen, so they would be found. He sat with her into the evening, the sky dimming around them. No movement except the slow rhythm of sleep creeping in across the litter. One by one, the pups stilled beneath her warmth. The wind settled again. The shed creaked once more, then fell silent. She closed her eyes at last, and the man stayed, not to take them, not to break what had grown here in dust and bone, but to witness it, to carry it with him. Outside, the dry grass leaned gently in the breeze, bowing to a weight no longer hidden. By morning, the ground had cooled beneath the rusted shed, and the air hung low with the scent of dry grass and distant rain that hadn't yet come. The man had returned with supplies before first light. Nothing loud, nothing bright. Just a blanket, folded twice to soften the earth, a shallow plastic bowl, and a zippered pack of food he'd rationed from his own kitchen. He moved slowly, each footstep pressed into silence, careful not to disturb what the night had cradled. The mother dog remained curled around her pups, her body forming a half-circle of quiet protection. She hadn't wandered, hadn't gone searching. Her trust was not yet given, but she hadn't turned him away either. She watched him now, eyes flicking toward the bag in his hands, nose lifting once to taste the air. Her ears stayed low, relaxed but alert. He didn't speak. Instead, he lowered himself to the same place he'd been the evening before, knees pressing into earth. The shed's old wall shielded them from the wind that had begun to rise. He opened the pack slowly and poured a handful of dry kibble into the bowl. Not much at first. Just enough. The scent of it drew her attention. She lifted her head from the dirt, eyes narrowing slightly, not in aggression, but weariness. Hunger lingered just beneath the surface of her restraint, a thin edge of urgency in the way her gaze held the bowl. Yet she didn't lunge, didn't move until he gently slid the bowl forward and backed away, leaving it just at the edge of her reach. She sniffed it, once, twice, then moved forward, slow and deliberate. Her paws patted against the cloth and soil with care, stepping over one sleeping pup as she reached the bowl. She didn't devour it. Instead, she lowered her head and began to eat in quiet, measured bites, chewing, swallowing, pausing between mouthfuls as if relearning how to take in nourishment without fear of losing it. Behind her, the puppies stirred. One yawned, a soft, soundless stretch of pink gums and tiny paws. Another rolled over, pressing its nose into the blanket, legs twitching in reflex. Their breathing was deeper now, fuller than the night before. The shivering had lessened. Their bodies, though still thin and folded in on themselves, no longer curled in tension. The mother dog finished half the bowl, then stopped. Her nose bumped one of the pups gently as she turned. She stepped back into the nest, arranging herself so her belly faced them. Without sound or command, they responded, crawling blindly toward her warmth, tiny limbs slipping over one another as they reached her. Their mouths searched instinctively, rooting against her body, nudging, suckling. The smallest struggled at first, unable to find a hold, and she responded with a soft shift of her leg, guiding it closer. She didn't look at them while they fed. She looked away, eyes blinking slowly, as if the release of that moment had taken more out of her than she could show. The man watched from a few feet away. He didn't move. The noise of the world beyond the shed had quieted. No cars, no machinery, only the low whine of wind through the grass and the barely there squeaks of nursing pups. Their small mouths latched and pulled, bodies pressed close to her side in a rhythm too old to be taught. It was in that rhythm something in the man softened, a pressure that had built silently within him since the moment he'd first seen her on the road. Bones wrapped in skin, eyes like flint. Now, with the bowl half full beside her and 5 tiny mouths drawing life from her body, he felt that weight begin to shift. She was no longer surviving, she was mothering. One of the puppies let out a mewling sound, high and brief, followed by another. Their limbs stretched and relaxed in unison. Bodies slowly uncurling from the tight knots they had slept in. Their fur glistened now with the faint residue of milk. They moved not in panic or instinct, but in comfort, slow, clumsy, safe. She licked each one in turn, starting from the smallest. Her tongue passed over their backs with short, efficient strokes. Not rushed, not indulgent, just enough. Her tail flicked once, then stilled again. The man reached into his pack once more, pulling out a small bottle of water and another cloth, dampened slightly. He placed it near the bowl but didn't offer it directly. If she wanted it, she would take it. If not, it would wait. Minutes passed like this. The bowl emptied. The puppies fed and drifted to sleep again, full and warm. The mother remained still between them, her body curved just enough to shield them from the draft that slipped under the metal wall. He murmured, almost without thought, "You're almost there." She did not react to the words, but her breathing deepened, evened. Her eyes closed just briefly. He knew this was not the end. They would need more than one meal, more than quiet shelter. But for this one morning, they had enough. Outside the shed, the wind picked up, brushing through tall grass in waves. The sun rose slowly behind a bank of thin clouds, softening the light that pooled across the field. Nothing stirred except the shadows. And within the quiet, one bowl, 6 mouths, and the silence of a moment held between strangers. One man, one dog. And the fragile lives she had never stopped holding close. The sun had climbed higher now, stretching pale light across the edges of the field. Morning passed without a rush. The hours between noon and dusk arrived quietly, melting one into the next, time marked only by the changing length of shadows and the soft rise and fall of breath under the rusted shed. She had not left them, not even once. Her body, still too thin, stayed curled protectively around the puppies, who now slept in intervals, stirring only to feed or shift closer. The blanket beneath them had warmed from body heat, smelling of milk and dust and the faintest trace of the man's hands. But she didn't mind it any more. She didn't pull away when he adjusted the corner to better shield the pups from the cool edge of wind that swept beneath the metal wall. He had returned again that afternoon, this time with nothing but himself. No food, no supplies, just the same quiet presence she had come to recognize. He didn't move toward her when he arrived. He simply sat a few feet away, legs crossed in the dry grass, eyes resting on the den without expectation. She looked at him once, brief, unhurried, and then closed her eyes. The man stayed like that for some time, his breath matching the rhythm of the wind that passed through the trees in long, steady pulses. He knew better than to disrupt the calm. It had taken days to build. It wasn't his to rush. From the edge of the shed, a bird flitted past, wings flickering in a short burst of sound before vanishing again into silence. The pups stirred at the noise, one kicking softly against its sibling, another pushing its nose against her side in search of warmth. She shifted slightly, letting her body mold around them. No growl, no startle, only care. Her eyes remained half-closed now, not asleep, but unguarded. The tension that had once held her upright, even when too weak to stand, had ebbed. The instinct to protect hadn't faded, but it no longer came from fear. It came from peace. The man reached slowly for a twig beside him, breaking it in half without thought, letting the sound fill the quiet. She didn't flinch. Her ear turned faintly in his direction, then stilled again. A few flies circled lazily in the heat. Dust clung to the curve of his boots. The minutes passed without need for action. Everything that needed doing had already been done. There was food in their bellies, warmth on their backs, and, for the first time in what must have felt like forever, safety that didn't vanish with the setting sun. He didn't speak often, but after a while, his voice reached out through the quiet again, just above a whisper. "You're safe now." She didn't lift her head. She didn't move toward him. But the muscles in her back softened. Her tail stretched out behind her and rested still. That was enough. The puppies fed again just before dusk. Their movements stronger now, more coordinated. Tiny paws kneading at her belly as they suckled. She licked one absent-mindedly between feeds, her nose nuzzling under its belly to coax movement. Another tried to climb over its siblings and fell into the crease of her folded leg, where it remained, softly twitching in sleep. The man watched without interfering. His chest ached in a way he couldn't name, an ache formed not from sadness, but from the quiet enormity of trust being handed to him without words, without promises. It was not affection. It was not gratitude. It was simply presence, acceptance. As the light began to fade, he leaned back slightly, resting on his elbows in the tall grass. The clouds, once thin and streaked, had thickened toward the horizon, catching the last of the sun's glow in streaks of pale gold and warm gray. A breeze moved across the land, slow and deliberate, pulling at leaves and brushing gently through the weeds that grew wild along the fence line. She stretched her neck forward and let her chin fall to the ground. Her body, curled in a protective arc, rose and fell with breath. The pups shifted into a tighter cluster against her belly, their small forms disappearing into the folds of her side. The man lowered his gaze then, not in sadness, not in reverence, but in stillness. This was the part he would remember. Not starvation, not the bones under the skin, but this. A mother, resting, not from exhaustion but from relief. Behind them, the trees swayed lightly in the wind. A branch creaked once and was quiet. The field, once a place she had crawled through in desperation, had become a cradle, and in that fragile space beneath bent metal and sun-warmed grass, the world had paused long enough to let her begin again. He did not need to stay forever. He knew that. There would come a time, not far from now, when she would rise without trembling, when the pups would nurse without fear, and when the den would feel too small for what they had grown into. But for now, he stayed, not as a rescuer, not as a savior, but as someone she had allowed near. And as the sky deepened into dusk, the last light spilled across the field in long, gentle strokes, bending through the open spaces, touching everything it could before slipping away.